The roots of the Middle Byzantine Empire lay in the dynasty of Michael II, who replaced Leo V as emperor in the year 820 CE. Though he continued Leo's policy of iconoclasm, it finally came to an end during the reign of his successor, Michael III. This encouraged a revival of the visual arts, which often had religious themes. But even though iconoclasm had been a theological sticking point between Rome and Constantinople, they were still more at odds over Michael's decision to dismiss Ignatius, who was the patriarch of the Orthodox Church, and replace him with the scholar Photius. When Ignatius was removed, he turned to Pope Nicholas I for help, who believed that the emperor did not have the authority to replace the Orthodox patriarch without the approval of Rome. Another source of conflict was the competition between Catholic and Orthodox missionaries over the non-Christians of the Slavic countries of Europe, and especially Bulgaria, whose king was targeted for conversion by both churches. In the end, the Bulgars embraced Orthodoxy, and it was for them that the modern Cyrillic alphabet was designed, which was based upon the Greek script, so that Christian texts and prayers could be written in their language. Michael was assassinated in 867 by his friend and bodyguard Basil, whom he had appointed as his co-emperor, and Basil founded a new dynasty known as Macedonian after his place of birth. Unlike Michael, who was criticized by both the Byzantine population and the church for spending his time drinking and entertaining himself rather than serving God and defending the empire, Basil was considered a devout and serious man. He helped repair the empire's relations with Rome by restoring Ignatius to the office of patriarch and distancing himself from iconoclasm. He also echoed one of the accomplishments of the 6th century emperor Justinian by commissioning a new code of law called the Basilica, from the Greek word for royal. While Justinian's code had been written in Latin, which was still used in his time for official documents, the Basilica was in Greek, which had become the language of government and the court system. And though a lot of its material consisted of translations of passages from the code, it also included additions and changes which reflected the realities of 9th century Byzantine society. It also did away with the legal role that had been played until then, at least formally, by ancient Roman political institutions like the Senate and the office of consul. Basil also tried to restore somewhat the Mediterranean Empire of Justinian's time by sending his armies to retake parts of southern Italy, which was now occupied by Muslim forces. And like his successors, Basil sat at the head of an elaborate and centralized bureaucracy that regulated the empire's farmers and its aristocrats. He taxed merchants and craftspeople and supervised their commercial dealings. It's this bureaucracy that gave us the adjective Byzantine to describe overly elaborate and complicated systems. In the centuries that followed, a number of emperors would try to rein in the corruption that often afflicted this bureaucracy, as offices were given to family and friends rather than to the people most qualified to hold them. When Basil died in 886, he was succeeded by his son Leo VI, who was known as the Wise, because of his intellectual pursuits, which included speeches, theological works, and books about government administration and military tactics. He also published the Basilica, which his father had first commissioned. Leo was at odds with the empire's aristocratic families because he was trying to limit their power and independence, as well as with the church, because he had replaced Photius, who once again had become patriarch after Ignatius's death, with his own younger brother, and then with several other men. Leo's successor, Constantine VII, was likewise a writer who produced a biography of Basil, as well as works about agriculture and administration. He supported the effort to preserve and write learned commentaries about ancient Greek literature, which had begun during the previous dynasty with men like Photius, whose bibliotheca, or library, was a collection of excerpts from classical texts. A contemporary of Constantine's also wrote the Suda, which was the first encyclopedia of classical culture. It was during the Macedonian period that the empire first encountered the Slavic state based in Kiev, which initially attacked Constantinople but went on to sign a trade treaty with it. The Byzantine merchants that then started to arrive were accompanied by missionaries, and the Russian Orthodox Church was established around the year 950 when the mother of the Kievan ruler converted to Orthodoxy and created a friendly climate for church activity. There were also some efforts around this time to create, through dynastic marriage, an alliance between the Byzantine court and that of the German Otto I, who had been crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 962, but they failed because each state wanted the other to recognize its legitimacy as the heir to the Roman Empire, and therefore the rightful ruler of both East and West. Basil II, who was a grandson of Constantine VII, became emperor late in the 10th century and ruled for almost 50 years. He had major military successes in Eastern Europe and against Muslim forces in Syria, even recapturing the city of Antioch, which was one of the first Christian communities. He also annexed the Kingdom of Armenia, and he married his sister to the ruler of the Kievan state. But his most important victory was against the Bulgarian kingdom, which he was able to defeat and absorb after 20 years of war. At home, he continued the efforts of his predecessors to reverse a serious socioeconomic problem, the concentration of the lands of Asia Minor in the hands of the owners of large estates, which was taking away from small farmers the land that had been given to them under the theme system established in the 7th century. Without this land, they could not acquire the minimum amount of wealth necessary to serve as soldiers, so Basil passed a law that took away from wealthy families any lands they had not owned for generations, and forced them to cover the tax obligations of farmers who did not have the money to pay them on their own. Basil's successors, however, neglected these farmers, and they kept their money at the imperial court rather than using it to train and pay new soldiers. The growth of large estates and the shortage of salaried soldiers gave rise to a military aristocracy in the territories that bordered the empire's enemies, and this military class clashed with the civilian bureaucracy of Constantinople over its foreign policies. After a number of shorter reigns by members of the Macedonian Dynasty who were born, adopted, or married into it, a new dynasty was founded by a general named Isaac Komnenos, who led a military revolt against his predecessor and was crowned emperor in 1057. One of the most influential figures of this period was Michael Psellos, who advised several emperors, wrote a history of the years between Basil II and his own time, and was placed in charge of the study of humanities at the University of Constantinople. Isaac had ruled for only a short time when he was overthrown by one general and then another, but his nephew Alexios succeeded him in 1081 and held the throne for almost 40 years. From the beginning of his reign, he was occupied with the Seljuk Turks, who had begun to invade and occupy Asia Minor, and had scored an important victory at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. Alexios also fought many battles against Robert Guiscard, a Norman French soldier who, in the middle of the 11th century, had seized southern Italy from the Byzantines and parts of Sicily from the Arabs. In the same year as the defeat at Manzikert, the last Byzantine city in southern Italy fell to the Normans. Alexios turned for help to the Republic of Venice, which was the empire's main competitor in the maritime trade of the eastern Mediterranean. In 1082, they signed a treaty which gave the Venetians, in exchange for their assistance, which never actually arrived, the right to trade free of taxes within the empire, control over the harbor of Constantinople, and their own colony inside the city itself. Then, in 1095, for help against the Turks, Alexios turned to Pope Urban II, who was an influential figure in the world of European politics. Urban agreed to help, but not in the way Alexios had expected him to. The Pope had already been looking for a way to unite the Catholic world, and even to bring the Eastern and Western churches together under the authority of Rome. But his solution was not to give aid to Constantinople. Rather, he called for a pan-European campaign against the Muslim world, which would liberate the Holy Land, a crusade. And in the wake of Urban's appeal, a series of armies, some more organized and disciplined than others, arrived in Constantinople on their way east. Alexios was promised that in exchange for giving these armies the food and supplies they needed, the Crusaders would return to him any Byzantine territories they might recapture from the Turks, including the city of Antioch. And though this did happen to some extent, Antioch became a Norman principality, and the entire eastern Mediterranean coastline, which had once been Byzantine territory, was turned into a series of small Latin states ruled by Europeans. In the next tutorial, we will take a look at the rest of the Komnenos Dynasty and the Palaiologos family, which ruled the empire until it was finally conquered by the Ottoman Turks in the middle of the 15th century.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.